Good morning. Namas. Uncle Jasanev from me and Serqet Aminra. Hey, good morning. Good morning, beautiful ones. How are you today? We've come to bring you some updated information. Say bye-bye. She's actually going over here to man her post, which is going to be holding the cell phone for us. She is going to hold the quantum tool. Serqet on deck always. So, what I want to share with you this morning is an article. Come over here, Serqet. It's a lot of sun over there. Well, they're just going to have to deal with Amen Ra. Deal with Ra because he is shining big time this morning. Okay, Serqet, there you go. We're just going to have this massive ball of light behind us. And it actually fits in with what we're going to talk about this morning. Coconut water. It has little pieces of coconut in it, but I just like strain it and pour it in the glass. Mixed with a little pineapple. Hydrated. A lot of us are walking around dehydrated and don't know it. Just because you don't dry up, but there's symptoms. Like I can look at my skin and tell when I need to go on my coconut water thing because you can just see like in your skin little crevices, kind of like the beginning of a wrinkle cycle. Okay. And if you've never tasted before, coconut water is quite tasty. Quite tasty. Okay. So, the wonderful news we have for you this morning is quantum theory proves that consciousness moves to another universe after we transition, after death. This article is by consciousreminder.com. And I will also post the article in our feed today. What I'm going to do is have a little reading of the article. Mind you, it's been seen by over 100,000 people. And it has 155,000 likes, which is interesting. That the likes are more than the views. Take note, for you YouTubers, the likes are more than the views. Excuse me, I'm a little congested this morning. Okay. And this is after our morning meditation, of course. You must do that first. Okay, so I'm going to read this article. A book titled Biocentrism, How Life and Consciousness Are the Keys to Understanding the Nature of the Universe, has stirred up the internet because it contained the notion that life does not end when the body dies, and it can last forever. There go your everlasting life theory. I think we're going to bust that wide open today. Let's keep reading, because see, this is the first run. I haven't read the article yet. The author of this publication, scientist Dr. Robert Lanza, who was voted the third most important scientist alive by the New York Times, has no doubts that this is possible. Beyond space and time, Lanza is an expert in regenerative medicine and scientific director of advanced cell technology of a company that works with advanced cell technology. Excuse me. Before he has been known for his extensive research, has dealt with stem cells. He was also famous for several successful experiments on cloning endangered animal species. But not so long ago, the scientist became involved with physics, quantum mechanics, and astrophysics. This explosive mixture has given birth to the new theory of biocentrism, which the professor has been preaching ever since. Biocentrism teaches that life and consciousness are fundamental to the universe. It is consciousness that creates material universe, not the other way around. This is getting good. Lanza points to the structure of the universe itself, and that the laws, forces, and constraints of the universe appear to be fine-tuned for life, implying intelligence has existed prior to matter. He also claims that space and time are not objects or things, but rather tools of our animal understanding. Lanza says that we carry space and time around with us, like turtles with shells, meaning that when the shell comes off, space and time, we still exist. The theory implies that death of consciousness simply does not exist. It only exists as a thought because people identify themselves with their body. They believe that the body is going to perish sooner or later, thinking their consciousness will disappear too. If the body generates consciousness, then consciousness dies when the body dies. But if the body receives consciousness in the way that a cable box receives satellite signals, then of course consciousness does not end at the death of the physical vehicle. In fact, consciousness exists outside of constraints of time and space. It is able to be anywhere in the human body and outside of it. In other words, it is non-local in the same sense that quantum objects are non-local. Lanza also believes that multiple universes can exist simultaneously. In one universe, the body can be dead, and in another, it continues to exist, absorbing consciousness, which is migrated into this universe. This means that a dead person, while traveling through the same tunnel, ends up not in hell or in heaven, but in a similar world he or she once inhabited, but this time alive. Ooh, this is so juicy. And so on, infinitely. It almost like a cosmic Russian doll afterlife effect. Why they want to mention that, I do not know. But we'll be moving on. Multiple worlds. Multiple worlds. This hope in stalling but extremely controversial theory by Lanza has many unwitting supporters, not just mere mortals who want to live forever, but also some well-known scientists. These are the physicists and astrophysicists who tend to agree with existence of parallel worlds and who suggest the possibility of multiple universes. Multiverse, multi-universe, is a so-called scientific concept which they defend. They believe that no physical law exists which would prohibit the existence of parallel worlds. I had to bring my witchy pillow out for this one. we've always known there's parallel worlds because we go to them and we come back. Okay. Now, the first one was a science fiction writer, H.G. Wells, who proclaimed in 1895 in his story, The Door in the Wall. After 62 years, this idea was developed by Dr. Hugh Everett in his graduate thesis at the Princeton University. It basically posits that at any given moment, the universe divides into countless similar instances, and the next moment, these newborn universes split in a similar fashion. And in the next moment, these newborn universes split into a similar fashion. In some of these worlds, you may be present, reading this article in one universe, or watching TV in another. I can't wait to get back to the COVID. Okay. Yes, indeed. The triggering factor for these multiplying worlds is our actions, explained Everett. If we make some choices, instantly one universe splits into two with different versions of outcomes. In the 1980s, Andrei Lind, scientist of the Lebedev's Institute of Physics, developed the theory of multiple universes. So this has been around. He is now a professor at Stanford University. Lind explained, space consists of many inflating spheres, which give rise to similar spheres, and those in turn produce spheres in even greater numbers, and so on into infinity. In the universe, they are spaced apart. They are not aware of each other's existence, but they represent parts of the same physical universe. The fact that our universe is not alone is supported by data received from the Planck Space Telescope. Using the data, scientists have created the most accurate map of the microwave background, the so-called cosmic relic background radiation, which has remained since the inception of our universe. They also found that the universe has a lot of dark recesses represented by some holes and extensive gaps. Where are we going with this now? Theoretical physicist Laura Mersini Houghton of the North Carolina University with her colleagues, for all my Southerners, this is being studied at the North Carolina University. Her and her colleagues argue the anomalies of the microwave background exist due to the fact that our universe is influenced by other universes existing nearby, and the holes and gaps are a direct result of attacks on us by neighboring universes. Dun dun dun. Dun 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 dun. Dun dun dun. Okay, let's go on. Now we get into talking about the soul. So there is abundance. So there is an abundance of places. I found the typo in this article. By the way, I'm a great editor-in-chief of editing documents. Back in a past life, I was looking at the scribes and filing them. No one can come touch the Hall of Records. For them that have an ear, let them listen. So there is an abundance of places or other universes where our soul could migrate after death. According to the theory of neo-biocentrism, but does the soul exist? Is there any scientific theory of consciousness that could accommodate such a claim? According to Dr. Stuart Hameroff, a near-death experience explains when the quantum information that inhabits the nervous system leaves the body and dissipates into the universe. Contrary to materialistic accounts of consciousness, Dr. Hameroff offers an alternative explanation of consciousness that can perhaps appeal to both the rational scientific mind and personal intuition. Consciousness resides, according to Stuart and British physicist Sir Roger Penrose, in those microtubules of the brain cells, which are primary sites of quantum processing. Upon death, this information is released from your body, meaning that your consciousness goes with it. They have argued that our experience of consciousness is a result of quantum gravity effects in these microtubules, a theory which they dubbed orchestrated objective reduction, OR. It's a theory. Consciousness, or at least proto-consciousness, is theorized by them to be a fundamental property of the universe, present even at the first moment of the universe during the Big Bang. In one such scheme, proto-consciousness experience is a basic property of physical reality, accessible to a quantum process associated with brain activity. Some of our elders have already told us this. That's why we're supposed to read and absorb as much information and quantify it in your consciousness. The information radiates and creates other consciousness in other realms. We've known that in the doggone channel forever. Remember, we communicated telepathically most of the time. Now, it goes on to read, our souls are in fact constructed from the very fabric of the universe and may have existed since the beginning of time. Our brains are just receivers and amplifiers for the proto-consciousness that is intrinsic to the fabric of space and time. So is there really a part of your consciousness that is non-material and will live on after the death of your physical body? Dr. Hameroff told Science Channels through the Wormhole documentary, let's say the heart stops beating, the blood stops flowing, the microtubules lose their quantum state. The quantum information within the microtubes is not destroyed. It can't be destroyed. It just distributes and dissipates to the universe at large. Renza would add here that not only does it exist in the universe, it exists perhaps in another universe. Perhaps. I lean more towards yes than no. If the patient is resuscitated, revived, this quantum information can go back into the microtubules and the patient says, I had a near-death experience. He adds, if they're not revived and the patient dies, it's possible that the quantum information can exist outside the body, perhaps indefinitely, as a soul. This account of quantum consciousness explains things like near-death experiences, astral projection, out-of-body experiences, and even reincarnation without needing to appeal to religious ideology. I was waiting to get there. Dun, 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 dun. The Ankh. In Kemetic science, which involves yoga, Reiki, meditation, and everything else to do with the astral body, is written on the walls, and in the scribes, and in the information, and in the DNA, and in the melanin, and in the genetic code, which is inside of the melanin, and which we already knew quantum light years ago. Dark matter, ether, carbon. Let's read on. Let me add, I love watching the scientists catch up with the starseeds, because we already know this. We've spoken this in different intervals. We are trying to offer it as our profession, because this is what we do. Energy. You must understand energy on a whole different level in this profession and in this world of consciousness. Okay. Like that. Let's move on. Okay. So that was the end of the article. Checking out some of the comments. I ain't even gonna go there because I know what I know, and I'm not looking for any validation. That's another thing that you got to get with the program on. Let's watch this short video by the scientist himself. Dun, dun, dun. Dun, 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 dun.
Robert Lanza was called by the New York Times.
Hold up, let me get my volume and everything together, because this is low. Hold up, I will start it over.
Just to give you an idea of the caliber of our next presenter. Robert Lanza was called by the New York Times one of the 3 most important scientists alive today. Just to give you an idea of the caliber of our next presenter.
Well,
I happen to love technology and quantum
I'd like to
physics.
thank Mauricio and the organizers for having me here. But I do have to say that yesterday I was at Logan Airport on my way here, and I was just about ready to get on the plane, and lightning struck the airplane and fried the electronics. And so while I was waiting there for the next airplane, I thought maybe someone is trying to send me a subtle message. But anyways, I'd like to talk to you here about biocentrism, which is a new theory of everything which arrives at the same conclusions as non-duality. So every now and then a very simple but radical idea shakes the foundations of knowledge. So when the discovery of the Earth, that it wasn't flat, challenged the way people perceived themselves and their relationship with the surroundings. Our ancestors were challenged to believe that the Earth was round, even though the ground they walked on was flat. And nothing in everyday experience revealed anything about the truth of this idea. So if the Earth was really round, it was argued that people at the bottom would fall off. So it was considered complete nonsense 500 years ago. So likewise, biocentrism is turning the world upside down again, with the seemingly simple idea that the universe arises from life, not the other way around. So switching the perspective of the universe from physics to biology undoes everything we know about the universe and life in it. We think that life is just an accident of physics, but a long list of experiments suggests exactly the opposite. Amazingly, if you add life and consciousness to the equation, you can explain some of the biggest puzzles in science. For instance, it becomes clear why space and time, indeed the properties of matter themselves, depend on the observer. It also becomes clear why the laws of the universe itself are fine-tuned for the existence of life. So until we recognize the universe in our head, attempts to understand the world remain a road to nowhere. So scientists fail to recognize those properties of life that make it critical for our existence. So the view of the world in which life and consciousness are bottom line to understanding the larger universe is called biocentrism. And it revolves around the way our consciousness relates to a physical process. It's a vast mystery that I've pursued my entire life with a lot of help along the way. So I've come to conclusions many of my colleagues and predecessors, placing biology above the other sciences, in particular physics and chemistry, in it.
Order in the court, order in the court, order in the goddamn court. Order in the court. Do you see how rude they is when they people demand, the scientists demand, standing up there talking, and they just keep... Child! No. Order in the court. Sit your ass down till I'm done talking. They need me down there to regulate the logistics. Told me wasn't nobody no walking past in my presentations. Bet that. Oh, rude little selves. They kill me.
Attempt to understand a theory of everything that has eluded these other disciplines. We're taught since childhood that the universe is divided into two entities, ourselves and that which is outside of us. So this seems logical. Self is commonly defined by that we can control. So I can move my fingers, but I can't wiggle your toes. The dichotomy then is based largely on control and manipulation. So the basic biology, however, tells us that we don't control most of the trillions of cells in the body any more than we do control a rock or a tree. So consider everything around you right now. Me up here at the podium, your hands, your body. Language and custom all say that that's outside us in the external world. But you can't see anything through the vault of bone surrounding your brain. Everything you see and experience right now, your body, the walls, the ceilings of this room, are an active process that's occurring in your mind. You are this process. You're not just the part that you control. So your eyes just aren't portals to the world. You think you just see out there, but again, you can't see through the cranium. So what you're seeing, again, is everything that you think right there is out there is actually a construction happening moment to moment in your mind. So again, I want to emphasize that this is all happening in your head, and even the light from the bulbs in this room, they're moving through a space that's actually created in your mind. So consider everyday reality. So, for instance, the weather outside. You see a blue sky out there, but the cells in your brain could be changed so that everything that's blue looks green or red. Could even do a little genetic engineering so that everything that's red makes a noise or vibrates or makes you want to have sex like some birds. Or, for instance, you think it's bright out. The circuits in your brain could be changed so that it's dark. You think it's hot and humid, but to a tropical frog it would look cold and dry. So this logic applies to virtually everything. Bottom line is, and the first principle of biocentrism is that reality involves your consciousness. It could not be there without your consciousness. Emerson once said, "We have learned that we do not see directly, but mediately, and that we have no means for correcting the colored and distorted lenses which we are, or of computing the amount of their errors. Perhaps these subjective lenses have a creative power. Perhaps there are no objects." So why is everyone surprised at the experimental findings of quantum theory? It's because we're still operating in a severely outdated paradigm. We still believe there's an external world that exists independent of the perceiving subject. So philosophers and physicists from Plato to Hawking have debated this. Niels Bohr, the great Nobel physicist, once said, "Not so. When we're measuring something, we're forcing an undetermined, undefined world to assume an experimental value. We're not measuring the world, we're creating it." And this is from a physicist. And at the legendary debates, Einstein presented ingenious ideas supporting the idea of a real world out there. But Bohr shot every one of them down one by one and gradually convinced his colleagues of his point of view. Today, however, most people still believe there's an external world out there. This issue, of course, is ancient and predates biocentrism, which of course explains why one view and not the other has to be correct. So let's consider a little of the physics, the real experiments. Consider the famous two-hole experiment. When scientists watch a particle go through two holes in the barrier, it acts like a little bullet and logically goes through one hole or the other. But if you don't watch it, it behaves like a wave and can go through both holes at the same time. So why should a particle out there change its behavior depending on whether you watch it or not? And of course the answer is that reality is a process that involves your consciousness. And again, there have been many, many versions of that experiment. Consider Heisenberg's famous uncertainty principle. If there was really a world out there with particles just bouncing around, then we should certainly be able to measure all of their properties. But you can't. So for instance, a particle's exact location and its momentum can't be known at the same time. So why should it matter to matter or to particles what you decide to measure? Again, the answer is simple. The particles aren't just out there. Again, we can go on and on. One more, entangled particles you've probably heard of. How can particles possibly instantaneously be connected at opposite sides of the galaxy out there in violation of the speed of light? Again, they're not just out there. Space and time are tools of our mind. They're forms of animal understanding. So this is the problem, in a nutshell, is that we look at the world like a chipmunk or a squirrel. The squirrel opens his eyes and sees the acorn, and it's just miraculously there. He grabs it and he scurries up the tree without any further thought. And we humans are the same. We wake up in the morning and the world is just magically there. We go through life, we drool, completely oblivious to what's going on around us in the world. But experiment after experiment shows that not a single particle out there exists with real properties until it's observed. So it doesn't take a genius to realize that reality is a process, again, that involves consciousness. So what we need to do is replace the old physics with a new biology. Space and time aren't these hard, cold objects out there, sort of like the pebbles and the shells you pick up along the seashore. No, wave your hand through the air. If you take everything away, what's left? Nothing. And the same thing is for time. You can't put it in a bottle like milk. So again, all of experience is just information that's occurring inside your mind, and space and time are the mind's tools for putting it all together. We even do it in dreams. With your eyes closed, you can be on the beach with bright lights just as real as we are here in this room. Your mind has the ability to create space and time just like it does in dreams. And in schizophrenics, anyone who may be a doctor realizes that those patients see people right beside them and reality just like this, just as real as you and I right now. But that's just part of the equation. Again, you have to look at what's going on in science, not just with the experiments, but in terms of observation. So it turns out that biocentrism may be the only rational way to explain the structure of the universe itself. So the cosmos, it turns out, has a long list of traits that make it appear as if everything was exactly tailor-made just for us. And some are calling this the Goldilocks principles, after the old nursery tale of the three bears who try different bowls of porridge. Some of the bowls are too hot, some are too cold. And the bears also try different chairs and beds. And each time the third bear finds that everything is just right. So likewise, the cosmos has an incredibly unlikely list of traits that make it not to this, not to that, for life to exist. So for instance, the Big Bang, if it was 1 part in a millionth more powerful, it would have rushed out too fast for galaxies and worlds to be here. Again, the result, no us. If the strong nuclear force would decrease by 2%, atomic nuclei would not hold together. Plain vanilla hydrogen would be the only element in the universe. Again, if the gravitational constant were decreased just a hair, stars, including the sun, wouldn't ignite. There are over 200 parameters so exact. These could be any number, anything, but they're exactly just right for life to exist. And so, again, if you tweak any of them, you never existed. So none of these are predicted by any theories, and they all seem exactly carefully to allow for life. And of course, it's been hijacked by intelligent design folks, but it doesn't mitigate the problem of why these constants are all exactly one way when they could be millions of other parameters. So one way is to say God did it, and the only scientific explanation is something called the so-called anthropic principle, which says that we must find these conditions because if we're alive, what else could we find? Well, of course, that really isn't an explanation. That's unless you say there are an infinite number of universes, and we just happen to live in the one lucky one where all the parameters are exactly right. And again, just one in a gazillion. Certainly we can do better than that. So obviously no universe that would allow for life could possibly exist from a biocentric point of view. The universe and all of its parameters simply reflect the spatial temporal logic of the animal observer. So it turns out the long sought-after theory of everything is really just merely missing one important component that was too close to us to have noticed. So some of the thrill that came with the announcement of the human genome had been mapped, or that we're understanding the Big Bang. It rests in our desire for completeness and totality. So these comprehensive theories, all of them, fail right now to take into account one critical factor, and that is that we're creatium. We're the biological creature that fashions the stories, that makes the observations, and it gives names to things. And therein lies the great expanse of our errors. And that is that science hasn't confronted the one thing that's most familiar and most mysterious.
Ye are
and
the
that
gods,
is, of course,
but
consciousness.
you don't believe
So
it.
for several centuries, a
You've
single
seen what he did with
mindset
that
has
God.
dominated
You've seen what he
scientific
did.
thought. This
You've
model
seen what he
has had
did.
countless insights and
Okay.
applications that have transformed all
Go
of
ahead
our
and get
lives.
stupid if you
But it's now
wanna.
reached the end
But
of
you've
its
seen
useful
what he
life.
did with that.
This old model
Kicked
proposes
it right
that the
to
universe
the
was
side.
until recently
Soon you're
just a
gonna be
lifeless
deemed
collection of
psychotic.
particles just bouncing around each other. And they observed they were following
Boom!
these predetermined rules that were mysterious in their
You ain't gonna
origin.
get past
And the
that.
universe was presented like this watch that had somehow wound up
You never,
and then now
ever gonna get
is
past that.
unwinding and
He's only
allowing for a
talking
little
about
quantum uncertainty will
what
unwind
we
in a
already knew.
semi-predictable way. Of
He's
course, there are
only
lots
talking
of
about
problems with this paradigm.
What we already
Some
know.
that are obvious,
He's only talking
others that
about.
are
Wait,
really
stand
mentioned,
on
but
the
just as
laptop.
fundamental.
Stand
but the
on it.
overarching problem
That's what I'm talking
involves
about.
life. In how life arose originally
Been
is
there
still
and
an
done
unknown
that.
process,
Catch up
even
with
though
the
we can follow
originators
it
of the
and
universe.
apprehend what's been going on since through
This shit is
Darwinian
mad old.
mechanisms. The bigger problem is that life contains consciousness, which is, to say the least, poorly understood. So consciousness isn't just a problem, though, for us biologists.
Always said
it's
that.
a problem for physics. And there's nothing in physics that can explain, as you've already heard over and over,
I am
how
so
a
cracking
group
up right
of
now.
molecules in the brain
Oh,
creates
yeah, I'm gonna
consciousness.
rub it in
So
just
the
a
beauty
little
of the
bit,
sunset,
'cause
the
you're
taste
arrogant
of a
and y'all
delicious
think
meal, these are
everybody
all
is
mysteries
bugging
of
out.
science, how we subjectively feel
Boom.
that. So how can something we can, like in neuroscience, we can pin down in the brain where parts of these occur.
See you in the next
but it's
life,
what's really worse is
where
that
I'll be
science
chopping
can't
heads
explain
for sure.
how consciousness arrives from matter. So our understanding of this most basic phenomenon is virtually nil. Interestingly, most of the models of physics don't even recognize this as a problem. But let's put aside all of the life and consciousness issues. The current model scientific paradigm leaves a lot to be desired when coming to try to explain the fundamentals of our universe. The universe, indeed, all the laws of nature themselves just suddenly popped out of nothing one day for no apparent reason. And we call this titanic event the Big Bang. And we don't even begin to understand the Big Bang, even though we keep tinkering with all the different parameters and expansion, for instance. But again, the Big Bang, we all know, is really not an explanation at all. At some point, virtually everyone has thought, this doesn't really work. This doesn't really explain anything fundamentally, not really. So when it comes right down to it, science is amazingly good at figuring out how the parts work. But what eludes us is the big picture. We create these exquisite technologies from our ever-expanding knowledge of the physical processes. We do badly in just one area, which unfortunately encompasses all bottom-line issues. And that is, what is the nature of this thing we call reality, this universe as a whole? In any honest summary of the current state of explaining the universe as a whole, it's a swamp. And this Everglade is one where alligators of common sense have to be evaded at every turn. So some scientists insist that the theory of everything is just around the corner and that we'll eventually know everything, and any day now. And this isn't going to happen, and it hasn't happened for a reason, and that is because we've shunted a very critical component out of our view, and that component, of course, is consciousness. And it's not just a small item. It's not like anything else. Indeed, it's nothing like anything else. Consciousness is awareness, it's perception, and in an utter mystery, we think it somehow just arises from goo. So how did inert, random bits of carbon ever morph into that Chinese guy who always wins the hot dog eating contest? So in short, the attempt to explain the universe, its origins, its parameters, and what's really going on requires us to understand how the observer, us, how our presence plays a role. So at first this may seem impossible, since much of consciousness still is mysterious. But as we shall see, we can use what we know and what we are increasingly learning to formulate models of the universe that make more sense for the first time. So undeniably, it's the biological creature that makes the observations, that creates the theories. And our entire education system, indeed the construction of language itself, revolves around that bottom line mindset that assumes there's a separate universe out there, which each of us individually arrives at on a very temporary basis. It's further assumed that we accurately perceive this external, pre-existing reality, and we play little or no role in its appearance. However, starting in the 1920s, the results of experiments have started to show just the opposite. So the observer, it turns out, critically influences the outcome. An electron, again, as I mentioned earlier, can be both a particle and a wave, but how, and more importantly, where that particle will be located, depends on the actual act of observation itself. And again, this is most famously illustrated in the two-hole experiment, which has been performed so many times in so many variations that it's conclusively been proven that if you watch a subatomic particle or a bit of light pass through two slits in a barrier, it will behave like a particle. And it creates these solid-looking hits on a barrier that the physicists can measure. And so like a bullet, it goes through one hole. But again, if you don't observe its trajectory, the particle then exhibits the behavior of a wave and can go through more than one hole at the same time. And since then, the list of paradoxes and intractable problems has continued to grow, starting with those accompanying the Big Bang. For instance, how could the entire universe just arise out of nothingness?
Ooh, all I can do. Go on, get my Go on, get the master teacher. Go on, get the master teacher right here. That's what I'm talking about. What is he writing? He already knows what they're trying to find out. And those that communicate with him, you know too. And on that note, I hope you've had a lovely little time with Serqet this morning. We cannot leave without the magician. Don't I have an ancient laugh? Peace.